On the show today, Sudan suspends daily exchange rate setting mechanism. And Kenya Central Bank holds main lending rate, says inflation expectations are within target. Plus, global coffee growers are being forced into poverty as international prices for the crop fail. Hello and welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Imana Amawe. Well, let's kick off with finding out what direction some of the markets here in Africa are going. Egypt was the poster boy at intraday, though with a marginal increase of 0.08%. And for the domestic bourse here in Nigeria, the bearish sentiment could still be felt as at intraday, the all-share index was down 0.16%. And South Africa also softened, albeit slightly, by 0.01% as at noon Nigerian time. Kenya also closed in the red territory on Wednesday. Saudi Arabia's stock market inched up 0.35% today after oil producer Saudi Aramco agreed to buy a 70% stake in Saudi Basic Industry. Some other Gulf markets we track were mostly positive at intraday, with Dubai adding 0.65%. Qatar gained 0.4% and Abu Dhabi was the laggard, trailing at minus 0.16% as some stocks traded ex-dividend. And over in Europe, the shares traded slightly higher today on the news of progress in the US and China trade talks. For more from Europe, I'm being joined by my colleague Daniel Koop, who is at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Hello, Daniel. It's always a pleasure to see you on the program.
Good to talk to you.
Yes, indeed. So first up, agriculture company Monsanto has had to pay $80 million to an American retiree who blames his cancer on their product. That's the weed killer Roundup. The 70-year-old Edwin Hardeman had sued Monsanto after using Roundup in his garden. Is the product Monsanto becoming more of a problem for the buyer now, Bayer, who took over the company?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, all of this latest development is not good news for Bayer and Monsanto at all, we should say. I mean, when we talk about the share price, I mean, it's down today only by 1%. But, after the news was emerging of those possible lawsuits, the share price of Bayer has lost more than 40%, just 20% within the last 4 weeks. So that is a big problem. That is, on the one hand, for the company, very risky, but also very expensive. I heard a statement a little bit earlier from the Bank of America stating that all of this could cost Bayer a couple of billion US dollars at the end. They're talking there about an amount of 5 billion US dollars. Well, we have to remember the entire merger between Bayer and Monsanto was already from the beginning very, very difficult. I mean, we have to remember that this acquisition here was the most expensive acquisition in the German history. Bayer paid more than 60 billion euros to get Monsanto. And I mean, frankly speaking, Monsanto is probably the most unpopular company in the world. And with this news, Bayer, there's a lot of at stake for Bayer as well, because their good image could be at the end at risk as well. So this lawsuit was now decided. Bayer has to pay this enormous amount of money, and the next lawsuits, you mentioned it, are already around the corner. Already tomorrow, a court in the state of California will be deciding about another lawsuit towards Bayer because of this situation. The strategy of Bayer at the moment, at least, seems to be the case that they feel that it's cheaper to pay those lawsuits rather than finding a settlement and finding an amount of money that then would be paid to everybody. But of course, this strategy is very risky, and investors are certainly waiting for answers and that this problem will be solved as soon as possible.
Okay, Daniel, meantime, in the UK, the Brexit drama continues. What are investors making out of all this?
Oh yeah, it continues. I mean, the latest news that we were getting just a few moments ago from the wires that tomorrow there is going to be another vote. I have to admit I have stopped counting how many votes we have seen already now happening there in the Houses of Parliament in London. Theresa May announcing yesterday that if one of her deals gets through, she would be also willing to resign. So that also did not really work out. All those 8 options that were on the table for Brexit alternatives yesterday in the Houses of Parliament. They did not find an agreement once again. And I mean, tomorrow is the day. Tomorrow would be the original day that the UK would be set to leave the bloc. And now the clock, of course, is again ticking, because now they really have to find an agreement. And if this agreement is not found by tomorrow, the UK will only have time until mid of April really to get a final answer. And if that's not going to be the case, they will leave the European Union without a deal. And that is certainly that market participants don't want, the European Union doesn't want, and of course also the consequences for the British economy would most likely be enormous. So it's also something that the UK does not want. But this option at the moment at least seems to be very likely, because we always know what the Houses of Parliament, what they don't want, but we still don't know at the end what they really want. And these answers, just in the case of Bayer, those answers are investors extremely anxious to get.
Of course, not just the investors, the whole world is watching. Now, for more on corporate stories, Boeing has so many problems at the time with the Boeing 737 MAX, which is probably the aircraft with the worst image in the market as we speak. But German flagship carrier Lufthansa is considering purchasing or placing a big order on the 737 MAX. Why is this so, and how are the customers reacting?
Yeah, this news was quite surprising, actually, when we received it. Indeed, the airplane at the moment is extremely unpopular after, it crashed there with Ethiopian Airlines and also with Lion King in Indonesia. So, I mean, all those passengers, all those aircrafts, I should rather say, right now are grounded. They are not flying anymore with passengers. Also, yesterday we heard the news that one of the 73 MAX that was only operating a ferry flight, which means without passengers, only with crew, had to make an emergency landing in the United States. But at the same time, yes, Lufthansa right now, Germany's flagship carrier, is thinking about placing an order. They want to buy 150 new short-range aircrafts. Right now, Lufthansa does not have a fleet of Boeing 737 aircrafts. They used to have them, the older version of the 737 MAX. And of course, I was reading a little bit on social media, the reactions right now from customers, of course, not being satisfied. They're saying, well, you want to invest now in this plane because probably you're getting it for a good deal at the moment, because nobody wants to get it. Well, I mean, we have to put this into perspective. Let's just imagine that Lufthansa really decides now to buy this plane. I mean, this plane, these planes would not be delivered, tomorrow or next month or something like that. We're talking about a time frame about, let's say, maybe 2 or even more years. And by that time, of course, everybody is also expecting that the problems that this aircraft was having, most likely related to the software, inside of the plane, that these problems will be fixed. But of course, yeah, I mean, it's when you talk to customers, they don't understand this right now. They, of course, would rather try to avoid this flight. But if you think a little bit more rational, by that time, in a couple of years, the problem will be fixed, and then most likely it will be a safe airplane. But of course, right now, you're absolutely right. The image of that plane is absolutely devastating.
All right, Daniel, that'll be all at this time. Keep monitoring the European space for us there.